had this novel finished for some time. Is it, is it unusual to get back out and talk to it after talk about it after you've been done with it for so long?
Yeah, it feels pretty. I don't know, not good. Microphone wise.
Yeah, you get right into it.
Right up in it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's been kind of a long process with this book. So yeah, I mean, I sold it, I guess, a couple of years ago, and then there was a long editorial process, but it's been finished for, I guess, since. I mean, we got galleys in June. I think.
Yeah, I remember you messaged me, and I mean, for those of you who don't know, Bill and I are very good friends, and I was delighted to get the book. But I remember when the galleys arrived, you were so excited it came, but then they got rained on.
Yeah.
The whole box got
they got delivered when we were out of town. Thankfully, our neighbors and friends, the Actors and the Buckleys, saved them before they got even more damage.
Well, I think it's kind of cool. Like I'm a book collector, but it even makes this one even more special. It's kind of got like a sodden kind of raised edge on it.
Yeah, it looks like it's got some like dive bar top damage.
I thought it was completely like somebody had paid extra just to have that thing. But for those of you, it seems like everybody knows Bill's work, but those who do not know Bill's work, I think this is the best explanation of you, Bill. This came from the Washington Post. Boyle knows the music of the Italian-American voices, from punk to barstool to operatic. Nobody else, like nobody else. Mob goons, college dropouts, melancholy widows, and pink-haired rockers make it up in this deliciously convoluted tale that reads like a fresh new season of The Sopranos. I think that's a hell of a quote to get into your work. So, you've been here in Mississippi for how long?
What year is it? We came here in 2008, so whatever that is.
And what drew you here was why did you come to Mississippi from being a New Yorker?
I'll try not to have this be too long and rambling an answer. I'm sure that people have heard some version of this before, but 2001, Katie, my wife, and I, then girlfriend, left New York and moved to Austin, Texas for a year. While I was in Austin, we used to go to movies all the time up the road from our house, and we saw Big Bad Love. And immediately after seeing that movie, and it had been on my radar because I love Tom Waits, and I knew Tom Waits was on the soundtrack. And I also think I knew at that point, in college I got into R.L. Burnside and Junior Kimbrough, so I kind of knew that stuff from here. I knew Faulkner, of course, before anything else. But anyway, we went to see that movie, and immediately after seeing the movie, I went to the bookstore, I guess Book People it would have been, and picked up Big Bad Love, and Larry Brown became my favorite writer, and read everything in the next few years, I guess 2 or 3 years probably. I went through everything that there was to go through, and so that kind of was, loving Larry's work was really what put Oxford on the map for me as a place that I wanted to. I mean, I knew of it already, but I wanted to get here, I guess, because of that. And the first times I, heard about his first book certainly were through hearing Larry Brown talk about it, and eventually, I came down here in 2008.
So how much did Larry's work, the way that he writes about this county and this world and his little postage stamp influence you about wanting to return to your world where you're from? Was that one of the big influences of it?
Yeah, it was a huge influence on me because I think, especially when I was kind of first publishing, I would often say, I'm not getting up in the microphone, I'm sorry. I would often say that, that he was the biggest influence on what I was trying to do, because there are a lot, there are just so many quote-unquote Brooklyn writers, writers who live in Brooklyn. Most of them have relocated to Brooklyn from elsewhere. So there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Brooklyn writers.
I remember one time you said something. I said, I'm going to Brooklyn, I'm checking out these places, and I said, has Brooklyn become Hipsterville where you live, and you said, no, my neighborhood's never going to become hipster.
It's changed in other more interesting ways than that. But yeah, so I knew that, I wanted to write about Brooklyn in a way that I didn't see a lot of people writing about Brooklyn currently. I mean, maybe there were examples and kind of like, of writers who I admired in the 30s and 40s who were kind of approaching it that way. But for the most part, there was no interest in these kind of working class, under the line neighborhoods. It was all kind of downtown and just much different Brooklyn than Brooklyn I knew. I think Larry Brown's work was kind of I kind of transposed. I thought, initially I was transposing what he was doing for North Mississippi onto southern Brooklyn. Kind of my goal was to write about that place in the way that he wrote about this place.
Well, let's talk about the scene of Narrow Street. I had not only the joy of reading this back in August, but also I had it while I had bronchitis, and so to me it's all melded in like a fever dream experience where it became all so real. This whole thing, I read it straight through, which usually I don't do that. Usually when I'm reading a book, I'll put it down and pick it back up, but I read it just straight through, and I remember probably driving you crazy, because that's the great thing about having friends that are writers. You could be reading their books and just text them and go, I can't believe you did that. That was unbelievable. That came out of nowhere. Bill was very patient with me at that time. So let's talk about this book. Let's talk about Sailing the Narrow Street, and let's talk about everything for me in reading your books is character, character, character. You have the greatest characters, the most defined characters. Let's talk about the Tabernas sisters.
So this book actually really started with the men, like an image of this character, Chooch. His name's Chris, and everybody calls him Chooch, except for Risa. And I kind of had this vision of him. There's a famous heavy metal club in my neighborhood called L'Amour's. It looked like L'Amour, but everybody in Brooklyn calls it L'Amour's. And I kind of just had this vision of this character in this heavy metal club, and from there it kind of led me to Risa, who's kind of the main character, I guess, in the book, and her sister Giulia. They kind of grew out of just kind of having this image of Chooch in this heavy metal club. And the book changed a lot over the course of writing it. I wrote a failed draft of a much different version of this book. Almost nothing exists from it except for the characters. In the early days of COVID, March to maybe May or June of 2020, and in that draft of the book, everything happened in one night in August 1986. It was a much different book. Some of these characters were there, and there were a bunch of other characters. It was kind of a disaster.
Bill, did you have to go through that in order to, do you think that was productive, that you went through it?
Yeah, in retrospect, I guess so. I mean, I don't tell me that at the time. You couldn't have told me that at the time that was, I thought it was just a failed novel at the time, and I kind of threw it away. Eventually, I went back to it and I didn't use anything from that draft whatsoever except for the characters. So they came to me like that. And Risa really, I think Risa's the main figure. She's married to this kind of bad seed character named Sav.
I don't know if you can see my notes right here. I actually wrote bad seed next to Sam.
He's just this bad man who Chooch is his kind of childhood best friend. They grew up on the same block together, and everything kind of comes to a boiling point on this hot summer night in 1986.
Let's talk about it. So you talked about this happening overnight in 1986. Your novel is actually 4 parts: 1986, 91, 98, 2004. You see the neighborhood change. You see Risa's son Fab grow up. You see all these. You just it's a movement of time. But let's talk about what happens back in 1986. Set up this hot summer night all the way to basically we'll get into the domino effect later, but talk about what starts off in the book.
So actually, in that previous draft of the book, there had been a scene where Sav comes home with a gun and points it at Risa and their baby son Fabrizio Fad as kind of a joke. And that scene is no longer in the book, but that's kind of what's just happened when the book opens. So the book opens with Risa kind of distraught that this has just happened, that Sav has crossed this line, and that he's having an affair with some kind of, some girl he hangs out with at the bar, and she's at home with the baby, and her sister shows up, having just gone through a breakup, and kind of, can I stay with you? And then Sav comes home drunk and saying that he's going to leave with his girlfriend, and things really kind of come to a head from there, and he gets physical with her sister Giulia, and Risa kind of lashes out at him and strikes him with a cast iron pan. This is the
Which has she been cooking? She's been cooking. What was she cooking before that?
chicken cutlets.
Chicken cutlets. And so it's a well-oiled pan.
It's a lot of oil. Yeah, the blood and the oil get mixed together on the floor.
Yeah, and it doesn't go well.
It doesn't go well.
For Sav, right?
I'm going to try not to ruin it for people, but I kind of don't believe in spoilers, and you can read that on the jacket of the book.
Yeah.
He dies. He dies in the first chapter.
In the first chapter, and there's an effort of getting out of Brooklyn and covering things up. Again, this is not a spoiler. This is the domino that launches the book.
Yeah, and I thought, I love film noir, classic noir, and I was really influenced by it. I think that's kind of a classic kind of noir trope, and it goes off in different directions from there, but I was definitely thinking a lot about Fritz Lang's Scarlet Street, and just kind of doing something like that at the start of the book.
And you kind of think about who are your best friends. You think about who's going to help me bury a body. That's usually what you think about. And that is who are your best friends. And you think about with Risa, with Giulia being her sister, and then Chooch. They help in this endeavor.
They enlist the help of Chooch. He's actually really kind of Sav's friend, but he's in love with Risa and really knows that Sav is not a good person, so he's willing to help Risa because he loves her and for the sake of her and the baby, and that's really that's the opening kind of action of the book, and that sets up what follows, which is, like I said, set in these 4 different time periods that are all compressed over a day and a half, but years apart. So
and you get to see Fab going from an infant all the way up to being a wayward kid.
Yeah, he's the baby in the beginning of the book. He's 9 months old and he's 18 in part 4 of the book.
And the scene that really just stays with me with Fab.
What's that?
There's one part where he's eating the dirt.
Oh yeah.
Eating the dirt off his father's grave.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the next point, which is this is also a very funny book. There's a lot of humor in this book.
Thank you.
And we've talked about how we don't have to write. You don't have to write books that are all sad, melodrama, this kind of thing. That there could be a variety of tones.
Yeah.
We talk about movies from the 30s. That could be very dark stuff that have levity of moments. I think about one of my favorite characters. He's just a scumbag. Is Roberto, who's Sav's brother. So after all this happens, Sav's brother comes back to town. He's been gone for a long time because there's another dispute that happens. Goes back to the neighborhood and wants to know what the hell happened. And he's so funny, but I hate it. You hate him, but you love him too. He's got what is he wearing a shirt when he first shows up? Bitch of the Year awards or something. I can't remember.
What is it? I can't remember. It's a funny T-shirt though. There's a couple of funny.
But he says awful things.
Second annual Big Bitch Fest.
Yeah, that's what
something like that. Roberto is. I had a lot of fun writing that character. So that's in the 1991 section of the book, which is part 2. He comes back. He's been missing. In 1986, he's been kind of AWOL, so he's not present for that part of the book. And then he comes back in 1991, and he kind of looks like Sav. So people, Giulia mistakes him for the ghost of Sav when she first sees him, and then he kind of throws a wrench in everything.
What do you think about with Risa and Giulia? They're sisters. Tell us a little bit about their differences, though. Because Risa's got a lot of stuff on her when we first meet her. She's got a deadbeat husband. She's got a baby. And then, but Giulia has her own baggage, and so tell the difference. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well,
Kids, to me, they're the core of the book. These two
yeah,
sisters.
they are, and that was definitely something that I, realized more and more as I worked on the book, because I think in the earlier drafts of the book, Chooch was still kind of the main character, and now he's kind of a little peripheral to them. He's still one of the main four characters, of course, but Risa's a lot more kind of, just trapped, I guess. She's been a good daughter. She's tried to do the right thing. She's a character who goes to church, has faith, is a good mother, and tries to deal with this kind of bad hand she's been dealt with Sav. Giulia is somebody who probably should have gotten out of the neighborhood and had a chance. She's kind of haunted by a relationship she had with her high school boyfriend, who went on to become a famous musician.
Who was Marco, right?
Marco.
So who's Marco? Is he based on anybody? Because he's a guy that came from the neighborhood, became super famous, and died, almost like I don't say Kurt Cobain or Jeff Buckley.
He's not based on anybody specific. I was definitely thinking about like Johnny Thunders, who I love, as kind of a model for him in a certain respect. But really, that whole that whole generation of kind of New York City working class, kind of punk Italian guys, the Ramones, some of Johnny Thunders in particular, but that was kind of a model for him, I guess.
And so one of the things that's so great about your books is the way they kind of cross over each other, which reminds me very much of William Kennedy.
Yeah.
When you pick up the William Kennedy books and everybody's crossing over, and you have a minor character in one book that's becoming a major character, and locations are the same or whatever. So how much of these locations in Brooklyn, like the dive bars, like the Wrong Number, like Crisscross, are these real places?
The Wrong Number appears in most of my books. From the first one on, I think it only makes a kind of brief appearance in this one. That was a very real bar that I didn't really know very well. It was kind of a dive. It wasn't like I drank there. It was just kind of always. It had this beautiful old sign that you can. There's a couple of New York City photographers, James and Carla Murray, who take pictures of great New York City store signs, and that's a classic one of theirs. It's called the Wrong Number Cocktail Lounge. So I just kind of, I was always in love with that sign, so I just kind of imagined my own version of that bar that kind of has shown up across these books. Beyond that, the Crisscross Cocktail Lounge, which is the main bar in this book, is a fictional place. And this book actually, I think in early drafts of this book, I was trying to make more connections with some of the mythology from my previous books, and eventually I had to not do that because it got overwhelming. Because I picture this when I write about a block. Typically, I'm writing about my block, and I was like, if I stay with this idea that all of these books kind of take place in the same universe, then everybody lives on the same block. And this is too much to keep track of and crazy. So I kind of had to reboot things a little bit with this book, which is why I came up with the fictional name for this block, Santa the Narrow Street, which is the title of the book.
So that's not real?
No.
I thought it was real the whole time I read it. I thought it was absolutely real.
And so there's an epigraph at the beginning of the book from a book called Far Reaches, a walking tour of southern Brooklyn, kind of talking about the origins of the name of the block. That epigraph is also fake.
This is blowing my mind. I was like, this is like an obscure book that you'd reference it.
It's part of the fiction.
Yeah. Part of the fun for me, the Taverna sisters, but also like the guys, the people you love to hate. I mean, that's what's so fun. Roberto, the other character that is just, obviously, writing about Brooklyn, writing about Italian Brooklyn neighborhoods, there's a tremendous amount of Catholicism in your books. Both people that are very strongly drawn to faith, but people that are very corrupted by it. And one of the characters who is probably maybe the worst guy in the book, I think, is Father Tim.
Yeah.
So tell us about Father Tim. And Father Tim, not to give anything away again, but Father Tim, he wants his slice of the pie. He wants his.
Yeah, Father Tim's present throughout the book. And then really becomes a point of view character in the third part of the book, which is 98, I think, that section. And
he's horrible. He's
I like writing him as a villain. He's kind of like this handsome young priest who I think a lot of people in the neighborhood kind of pin their hopes on because he's young and handsome, and they kind of mistake him for being something that he's not. He's an orphan, grew up as an orphan, turned in an orphanage, become a priest, and we kind of get glimpses of him in the earlier parts of the book, but then in the third part, we get his point of view, and he's just kind of like, gambler and a drinker, and sees an opportunity to blackmail Risa and takes it. So he was fun to write. I had a lot of fun writing this kind of, from his point of view, which is not something that I planned on doing. And then that was actually, he was in the book, and that was the storyline.
Did you have any bad priests growing up that you kind of said,
There are a lot of bad priests. I didn't have any. I had like a couple of scary priests in my parish, but they weren't bad in the way that a lot of the other ones were.
How much, because the time jumps, where we're seeing the neighborhood change, everything change, we're seeing just culture stuff. How much did you have to go back to kind of refamiliarize yourself with 98, 91? Did you have to, was that a lot of work, or was that just ingrained in your memory growing up?
Yeah, it wasn't that much work. It was mostly just ingrained in my memory, and because the world of the story is pretty small, and a lot of the book is set really just in the kind of houses and apartments of these characters, and the bar. So I didn't have to do too much with the place. The stuff in the bar. There's little details that change, and obviously kind of like the things people have change a little bit, like the way people listen to music, things like that.
You've got so many musical references, in both good and bad, depending on your point of view. But you have Van Halen, Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath. That's kind of like Chooch's.
Yeah, Chooch is a metalhead. So, and when I was a kid, I was really into, like little kid, I was really into hair metal. And
see, that was something I've known you for years. I did not know that.
Well, I'm 46, so that was kind of a big thing when I was 10, 11, 12, and then when I heard Nirvana in 90 or 91, whatever that would have been, everything changed for me. My musical taste changed, but a few years before that, my taste was Chooch's taste.
Was Chooch's room? Was that your room with those posters?
No, it wasn't my room. But the music he liked, like he loves the band Tesla.
Yeah.
I love Tesla was my favorite band as a kid. He loves all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I got to kind of White Lion. White Lion was a big one because the guitarist in White Lion was an Italian guy from Staten Island. So.
Chooch is really, I think he's the glue that holds everything together. It's funny, we started, I don't know how we got onto it, just started about how he came here and talking about Larry Brown. But for those of you, how many of you guys have read Joe? He's kind of like a Joe character, because he's a guy trying to do the right thing. Yeah. But he just gets screwed, and he's almost like Job.
Yeah. I can see that, yeah.
Everything's put on him, he's trying to do the right thing, and it's every turn he gets shut down.
Yeah, I think it's the book is kind of a tragedy, and ultimately, I think all noir is kind of tragedy, and it's part of it is part of that is Chooch's.
Yeah, and I think the genius of your work and the genius of the book, and one of the things I enjoyed it so much, is it is tragic, and there's horrible things happen. There's murders, there's a guy hit in the head with a frying pan.
But it's funny
too. But it is funny too. It really is. There's some parts of this that I was laughing out loud. All your dialogue is just brilliant and just sharp as hell and just wonderful. I have more things to ask you about, but I think we're going to, Jude, are we getting to the point of the show where we're looking at questions?
You can keep going because we started.
Well, I tell you what, we've got a little bit of time here. Bill, I'd love to hear you read, if you don't mind, from a section of the book.
I haven't read from this yet, and I haven't read from anything in a while, so let's see how this goes. I'm going to change my glasses. Sorry. I'll just read. I mean, I don't really. The opening chapter is pretty long, so I'm going to read a brief excerpt from the second chapter. The first chapter is from Risa's point of view, and it's the chapter where what I described happens. Risa's there with the baby, having just had Sav pull this gun on her as a joke, basically, and then he's gone. Her sister's there at the beginning of the book, and they're kind of working around that this has just happened. She hasn't revealed it to her yet. Eventually, she reveals it. Sav comes back drunk, saying he's going to leave with his girlfriend. Gets physically assaults Giulia, and Risa hits him with the cast iron pan, and he hits his head on the table as he's falling. And that's the end of chapter 1. And then we pick up from Giulia's perspective in chapter 2. And I'm going to read just a couple of pages from Giulia's perspective. Giulia had never been sure why Risa married Sav. As a girl, Risa would spend hours drawing birthday and holiday cards for Giulia. She'd always buy her some thoughtful little gift from one of the stalls on 86th Street. Earrings, a bracelet, magnets, stuffed animals, toys that danced, stickers for her sticker book. She was the kind of girl who'd bring Giulia tea and soup in bed when she wasn't feeling well. The way she said things, she was never critical, always supportive. Even after everything went bad with Pop, Giulia always felt like Risa was on her side. Risa even believed in God and went to church in a way that seemed sincere to Giulia, who'd given up on all that shit long ago. That was Risa in a nutshell, always thinking about how she could make others happy, everything from the heart. Sav, on the other hand, Giulia pegged as trouble from day one. Her ex-boyfriend from high school, Marco LaRocca, grew up right here on the same block as Sav, so she'd seen him around a little, heard a few stories, the way he wore his clothes, the way he walked, the way he did his hair, the swagger and indifference, his voice. It was all right there in his eyes. He was searching to take advantage of people and situations, hustling, filled with aimless rage, always walking on ledges. Sure, he'd gotten worse, but he was never good to start with. There's that old saw about opposites attracting, but there's a difference between opposites and people who are just flat out wrong for each other. The night before Risa and Sav's wedding a couple of years back, Giulia was sitting with her sister at a table in a bowling alley in Bay Ridge called Yellow Hook Lanes. That was what Risa had wanted to do the night before her fucking wedding. Go bowling in Bay Ridge with her maid of honor and bridesmaids. Giulia was her maid of honor, of course, and her girlfriends Marta, Lily, and Grace were her bridesmaids. There was a lot of cackling. They actually bowled. It was a night full of gutter balls, which seemed appropriate in hindsight. Giulia drank cheap beer, whatever swill they had on tap, and Risa and her girlfriends drank soda like teenagers. They were in their mid-20s, but no one wanted hangovers, except Giulia, who couldn't imagine being at the wedding without a hangover for a variety of reasons, including the fact that it'd be the first time she was in the same place as her father in about 5 years. After a few plastic cups of beer, Giulia pressed her sister to reconsider this whole fucking marriage to Sav thing. He's not a good guy, Giulia said, slurring her words. Don't say that, Risa said. You don't know him the way I do. What do you know that I don't? He can have a sweet side. I know his type. He's a loser. He'll go through bad jobs. He'll stay out every night. He'll cheat. He'll be mean as shit. My wise old little sister. I'm not kidding. Why does everyone expect certain things from me, Risa asked. Like everything with her, it was a sincere question. Giulia could only guess at the time that marrying Sav served as some sort of quiet rebellion against such expectations. Everyone thought she'd find some sweet, soft guy at a church mixer, but she went for a neighborhood scoundrel who loved heavy metal and occasionally stole cars for joyrides and dragged around poor Chooch from across the street like a pet. No surprise, Giulia had gotten him exactly right. In the last couple of years, as Sav showed Risa how terrible he could be, Giulia tried her hardest not to say, I told you so. She hated seeing her sweet sister suffer, especially during her pregnancy and after Fab was born. Giulia looks at Risa, watches as she strokes Fab's head as he nurses. She's shaking. That much Giulia can tell. The reality sinking in. Stop there.
Excellent. to another writer, is I felt like I inhabited this book and lived it. I didn't feel like I was reading a book to say, oh boy, look at that section or whatever, or somebody. It just, I was fully engrossed in it, and it was just wonderful. It's funny, it's heartbreaking, it is edgy, it is just, it's everything. It's really wonderful. So we have a few more minutes here, which I'm going to throw open to questions out there from the studio audience. So if you guys have any questions here, glad to take them in the last few minutes here. There's always that long pause. So there's a first question. First question? Yes, ma'am.
Have you written all your books about Brooklyn? Oh, since you have been away from Brooklyn?
Yeah.
Do you feel that, could you have written the books as intimately if you had stayed there?
So that's a very good question. That was actually one of my questions. So did you write all the books living here in Mississippi, and could you as effectively have written about Brooklyn if you had stayed and not come south?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I moved here, as I said, in 2008, and I didn't start publishing books till 2013, so it is just it's the way it's happened. So I really I can't say definitively what my work, I think I would have still written about Brooklyn had I stayed in Brooklyn, but I do think that seeing it from a different place and being away from it has definitely changed the way I would write about it. I mean, I can't really say what that other version would look like if I had stayed, but I think, definitely, since I haven't lived there full time in so long, definitely a byproduct of that is kind of writing about the time that I lived there most intimately. So this book is set, in a period between 1986 and 2004 when I was still there for the most part. That's definitely been one of the nice things about kind of revisiting that time. But I also think that the way I write about Brooklyn is not. I mean, I write about my Brooklyn. I write about. There's a term that can't remember the guy's name. There's a really good documentary about Hubert Selby Jr., who I love, where this critic or journalist says that Selby wrote about a Brooklyn of the soul, and so I think that's kind of what I'm doing too. I'm writing about a Brooklyn of my imagination, a Brooklyn of my soul, and being away from it has definitely influenced that kind of blending of the real, fictional, the mythological, the totally just invented and imagined, So, yeah, I mean, it's just, again, it's what I've done, but I do think that being away from it has added some ingredient that wouldn't be there otherwise.
All right. Yes, sir.
Congratulations on the book.
Thanks, Matthew.
I'm curious, we live in a town, the change is coming rapid at us in Oxford now.
Yeah.
And you spoke of, the perceptions of Brooklyn as being overrun by hipsters, and that wasn't your Brooklyn. When you go back home and, now living in this place, the place of rapid change, when you go back home to Brooklyn, can you describe the change in Brooklyn now? It's not the hipster revolution, what is it?
So talk about your neighborhood. If it's not the hipster revolution, how things have changed when you're going back to your neighborhood now. What are you seeing that's different?
Yeah, well, I mean, Brooklyn is massive. If anybody's ever read the great Thomas Wolfe story, Only the Dead Know Brooklyn. It's spot on. It's like there's neighborhoods certainly neighborhoods I've never been to, neighborhoods that are just far away from my experience. That's the majority of Brooklyn. My part of Brooklyn. So when I was growing up, despite my Irish-sounding last name, which is actually Scottish, my dad was Scottish. I grew up with the Italian side of my family. And my neighborhood was largely Italian-American. I've kind of lived on the border of Gravesend and Bensonhurst. And in the 80s and 90s, I'd say it was kind of a dying Italian-American neighborhood. So it was at the end of something. My grandparents lived there their whole lives, and they stayed there until they died. Not everybody left, but a lot of people were starting to leave then, and were moving away to Long Island and New Jersey and Staten Island. So it really felt like when I was growing up that it was kind of ending. You know, what it was ending. There were no kids on my block. It was like a lot of older people, and then younger families kind of heading out, and even some older people heading out. The way my neighborhood has changed has basically been it's remained kind of a working class immigrant neighborhood. It's just that the immigrants have changed. So now it's pretty much a Chinese American neighborhood. It's the second largest Chinatown in New York City now. So like 86th Street, which is the main drag in my house, which if you've ever seen the French Connection.
I thought that was one of the coolest things when you were trying to explain where you lived. You're like, you know that great chase scene?
Two blocks from the L that the French Connection chase happens under, the elevated train tracks. That's where I live. And so that whole drag, which used to be a lot of Italian markets and bakeries and stuff, is largely Asian markets and Asian bakeries and Chinese restaurants. And so it's actually a much more exciting neighborhood now. It's lively, it's thriving, there's tons of kids around. Obviously it's way more diverse than it was when I was growing up. And it's a great, there's still not a lot to do there culturally in terms of like, there's no bookstores, there's no movie theaters, there's no record stores, nothing like that. There's no music venues, there's not really any bars even, but there's a lot of good food. It's been interesting to see that, especially in comparison to what people think of. Because there are neighborhoods in Brooklyn that have been gentrified now that I don't think anybody would have anticipated that happening to places like Bed-Stuy and Bushwick, in the way that it's kind of spread, across that part of Brooklyn. But Southern Brooklyn is still, is not that at all.
Can't you get good pizza in North Mississippi?
Next question.
Other questions? One question I was going to ask you, Bill. I know you're a movie guy, and so much of what you write is influenced by film or whatever. And this is, I'm going to really put you on the spot here as we're winding down. I want to talk about casting. So let's say your dream cast here for this film, because this would make a hell of a movie. I mean, this is a Scorsese film. This is terrific.
I got a document.
All right, you can pull it up. You ready? For Risa, who do you think?
Wait, hold on. I got to pull up my document here. I have been thinking about it because somebody asked me to write about that.
And that's not something I normally would ask another writer, because they always say, well, that depends on who the director is, that kind of thing. But I know that you think very cinematically. You think very much.
I do, yeah. And so for Risa, I like the actress Kristen Milioti.
Okay.
She's most recently in The Penguin.
Okay, all right.
But she's in she was in that movie with.
And we're talking about, it has to be, we're not saying of all time.
Oh yeah.
No, of all time. We're talking about.
I'm thinking about contemporary people, which is hard. So it's hard. Like for Fab, I can't tell you, like I can't name kids who can play a character that ages from 9 months to 18 years. I just can't do that. But I can think about Risa and Giulia and Chooch.
I kept on thinking of Giulia, Marissa Tomei.
Well, yeah, I mean, not now. She's like 60. I think about Marissa. Well, I think about Marissa Tomei all the time.
Yeah.
But I do think about her like, I mean, she's one of those. I called it. There's a whole group of kind of Italian American actors who kind of came up in the 80s and 90s, who I think of as kind of these saints of my imagination. I'm always picturing in everything I write. Marissa Tomei, Edie Falco, Steve Buscemi, John Turturro, this whole crew that was, huge. Their films and their performances were really influential on everything I write. So she is somebody. I mean, if I was casting this at any time, at any point in time, she would certainly be.
What about Alyssa Milano? Would she be on the list?
I did have a picture of Alyssa Milano on my wall.
I know. In a hockey jersey.
Yeah, in a Devils jersey, in a New Jersey Devils jersey. No, I don't think. Well, sorry, Alyssa Milano. I don't think she's quite.
What about for the bad guys, for Roberto and Father Tim?
I really thought about them.
They're
so
both
much.
great role. Roberto's such a great role.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have a whole list of people.
I keep on thinking about the guy from the Bear, the cousin.
Yeah,
What's his name that's in the new Fantastic Four?
Yeah, what was his name? Blanking on his
I'm
name.
blanking on his name too, but I just kept on thinking about he's got that kind of nervous energy, kind of a bad guy, but a guy that you
I like, you know, again, it's hard for this book because it's set across 18 years, so you have to kind of think about who can play a character that ages from their mid to late 20s into their mid to late 40s. I think Risa, I can't remember off the top of my head, I think Rissa's 28 when the book opens and is 46 in the last part of the book. So that's just difficult to think about casting. But I have a whole list of just kind of like actors that I love that I would think about. John Magara was this actor that I really like, who you know I could see as Chooch. And then I have just like all the classics. Some of the older characters I'd love to see, like Jack and I's favorite Ray Romano show up as like one of the old moth collector guy that shows up in the last part of the book. But yeah, I got a whole list of possibilities. I really thought through.
Well, the whole book, it feels like a film. It pulls you in. Like I said, it's got all the different emotions. It's so damn enjoyable. I could not put it down. I had so much fun reading it. And there's darkness, but there's light. There's hope, and there's darkness and great comedic elements. And it was the best book I read last year. I thought it was just wonderful. So you guys, thank you very much for coming out tonight. I'm sure Bill is ready to sign some books, which I will add on this. This is a beautiful looking book too. They did a great job on the cover.
Yeah,
And it's one of the few rare books I pick up where it actually feels like the book. It has that feel to it. So congrats, Bill, and we're so lucky to have you here.
I appreciate it. Thank you.